This week in class, we discussed the Woman Identified Woman Manifesto. And talking about this, we talked about a lot of quotes from the book that talked about like societal views about women. And there's a quote that really stood out to me and it like resonated with me and I'm still thinking about it. And it says, "To the extent that she cannot expel the heavy socialization that goes with being female, she can never truly find peace with herself, for she is caught somewhere between accepting society's views of her, in which case she cannot accept herself, and coming to understand what this sexist society has done to her and why it's functional and necessary for it to do so. Those of us who work through find ourselves on the other side of a torturous journey through a night that may have been decades long. The perspective gained from that journey, the liberation of self, the inner peace, the real love of self and of all women is something to be shared with all women because we are all women." And the reason that this is so important to me is it really talks about all like girls like kind of coming together and girl power and just like empowering each other instead of, talking down and manipulating each other. Because at the end of the day, we're all women and we all know what it feels like to have somebody else put us down because of it. And I think when we can all realize that to be able to move along in society and to be able to build each other up and get to higher places in the world, we need to have this foundation of everybody being on the same page. And another thing that it kind of talked about is being a woman, you are expected to be at your best 100% of the time. And society enforces this, like through like celebrity magazines, you see, oh, like a celebrity went off without makeup on, and it's like a huge deal, and through advertisement and just everyday criticism. And it just needs to stop, because if it continues to go, we're not going to get any further. We're going to be stuck in this rut of just women being lesser. And that's not okay. That's not something I want to see for the future generations. And there's this last part, and this last part's probably the most important part to me, is it talks about self-acceptance. And it kind of ties in with all the rest of it. And if we don't have this self-acceptance of us first, it's hard for us to accept other people. I'm a really bad person when it comes to that because I don't accept myself. And it's important because if you can't surround yourself with women that uplift you, you're not going to get anywhere either. And we have to all like be part of the sisterhood and help each other out. And I think this quote is probably the best quote to explain all of this and put it into words that everybody can understand. One of the lectures this previous week, we talked about the COC and its whole like background in LGBT policies and how it helped and what it actually started off with and what it changed into over the years. And what it basically started off was as like a safe place for LGBTI people and kind of like a meeting place. But it was just like the single one space because it was like homosexuality was tolerated, which means like it wasn't illegal, but nobody was like, yeah, like let's go gays. It was just kind of like, okay, like do it in your own spot. And so the COC fought really, really hard to make more spaces available and to fight for rights, but without like the legal personality to come in and help them out, they really didn't have like a standing place. They didn't have any leverage to help them get anything done. And so it wasn't until 1954 when they got the legal personnel. And so then when they got that, immediately they were able to like put people into like the different groups in the government for them to be able to get like a little more push on the actions that they wanted. 1982 was a really big deal for the LGBTI community here. And what happened, it was they went out and they had their Pink Saturday festival in the Bible Belt. And they had protesters from like opposing sides, like anti-gay people, come in and like they beat the shit out of everybody. And so many people were hurt. Like it gave the COC the opportunity to kind of like wedge their way in and say, hey, look, this needs to change. This is what's going on. And it it got them to it got the government to look and be able to realize, hey, like this isn't okay. And they came up with laws that made it illegal to use gay slurs at somebody and to use profanity at them and judge them. And now that the LGBTI community had that leg up from the Pink Saturday incident, it still wasn't until 1998 that they could have legal partnerships, which wasn't really a marriage, but it was like, this is the best we're gonna give you kind of thing. And it wasn't until 2001 that they actually had the first legal same-sex marriage. And even though like we've come so far here in like rights and equality for the LGBTI community, I still see that like something's missing. And maybe it's just like the lack of like some of the spaces, because they're really like, there are some bars, but there's not like spaces for like youth and for everybody. And that's something that I actually am going to research while I'm here, is queer spaces that are here, and like not just like bars and clubs, but like places to hang out, like safe spaces, like in museums and that kind of thing, because I think it's important when you're part of a community to have something. And they did talk a little bit about what kind of made it dissipate, and I think a lot of it had to do with like the upcoming of the internet, because now we have like apps like Her and Grindr and Tumblr, you know, as like social platforms, and that's a really great way for like people to meet each other, but it's not like the physical aspect that's still lacking here. And I know other people are doing their projects on it dissipating as well, and I would definitely love to like talk to them about what they find in their research to help further mine along. And I am really excited to start it and figure out like what I'm gonna find, where it's gonna take me. And I think the thing that I'm most excited about is I am gonna be able to actually go and like find new places and kind of explore the city on my own, but like with a purpose. I've been taking a lot of time to think about our discussion of the inclusion of pedophilia in the queer community, as well as a sexual identity. And I do feel like it is qualified to be a sexual identity because it defines who you're sexually attracted to, and that's what a sexual identity is. And I do sympathize with not being able to express yourself sexually and feeling like you are invalid. However, I don't agree with pedophilia in the slightest, and it's a very, very hard thing to process for me. But when you think about pedophilia, your first thought is an old man and children. And it doesn't take into consideration that there are women that do it too. And when you think about it, we put terms on people, like we call older women looking for younger people cougars, and nobody bats an eye. Or like older men looking for younger people, like a sugar daddy or a daddy. And that's like totally like normalized now. But where do we draw the line? Do we draw the line at the age of consent? Or like where does it become creepy versus normal? And another thing I thought about, because I am the person I am, is what it's caused by. And it's caused by like deformities in your brain and like childhood trauma. And they did say the same thing about being gay. However, there's a gene in your brain, it's called XQ28, and there are studies on it, and that's what makes you gay, not deformities or trauma. And that being said, with it being from deformities in your brain, does that validate it? Or like, you know, can it be treated? Do they want it to be treated? And I've been thinking, in my past, I've had this singer that I really, really liked, and he was fantastic, and I really enjoyed his music. And just recently, he got arrested for making and having child pornography. And it broke my heart, and it really tore me down. And in an interview, he said that he had been doing it for a year, and he was addicted to it. Me, being the sciencey person I am, had to go and research it. And what I found is, in studies, the brain with porn addiction doesn't look like what it does with like regular addiction, like alcohol or drugs or smoking. And that really like struck me. So what they did is they used an EEG machine to look at your brain, and it researched the late positive potential, the LPP, in the brain, which reflects the intensity of like your emotional response. Because if you're addicted to something, you have to have an emotional response. That's how addiction works. And what they found was it didn't look like it was supposed to look when it comes to addiction. And it showed that the brain was not sensitized to the sexual images. So it was saying there's the feeling that it's there, but your brain's not actually addicted to it. And so that struck them as really, really weird. And that being said, how does that make it treatable now that it's not the same kind of addiction as everybody thinks it is? Like, does that make it okay? And I don't think it makes it okay, but I do think it's something to think about and take into consideration. And I don't think at all that it should be inside the queer community. And the fact that people do put it in is really frustrating, because that puts a bad connotation on the entire queer community when we are trying so hard to get back from it already. So we just came back from our trip from Brussels, which was a lot of fun, and there was really good chocolate, and it was great. And we visited the EU Parliament, and we got to hear about how their legislature works and the processes in getting like people's rights and the different groups that are working towards it. And I thought it was very cool and like intriguing how they have so many different groups while we just have two, and how like they work together. And the way he explained it was really easy for me to understand. And he was really, really funny talking about how like the right side just doesn't give, like they don't care. And it's like, I thought that was funny. He was precious. But I really wanted to ask a question, and I should have, and I didn't, about like if Belgium itself has like a group that is specifically towards like LGBTI rights, like how Amsterdam had the COC from like the very beginning, if like Belgium had the same thing. And so I was just curious about that, and I kind of regret not asking, but I didn't have the guts to do it. Also in Belgium, it was a lot of fun. We went to the Delirium bar, which was super cute. It had like pink elephants everywhere. And on our way back, there was a group of 5 of us. Yeah, 5 of us. And while we were walking back to the hotel that we were in, a car pulled up and started catcalling and harassing my friends. And then naturally they screamed like, "Fuck you," and the car drove away. But then it put on its brake lights and like drove back. And it was so terrifying. And in that moment, like my heart stopped. And I was terrified for the safety of my friends and what could happen to them. And it was just very frustrating, because a lot of people don't know what they would do. And I know that if something worse were to happen, I would be right there ready to go. And I'm glad that nothing else happened. Like they just screamed and then drove away. And you know, we are very privileged that we can go out at night by ourselves, like not accompanied by men. But at the same time, like we have to always be cautious of our surroundings and what's going on, and we have to be wary of our reactions. Like if it was just someone by themselves and a person catcalled them, like their reaction couldn't be the same because of that fear for safety. And that's something that we talked about in the WS202 discussion was doing things according to men, like being like men identified. And so I think making that connection, it was not a fun connection to make, but it was something that had to have been made. And so when we got back, we watched the movie John Tucker Must Die, which is totally a classic movie. But what really frustrated me is when they were talking about making Kate, the main protagonist, into this dream girl for John Tucker, and she said no, they pressured her into it and they tore her down, and that's not okay. And in the quote that I said in like the beginning of this video, it talked about how we have to empower each other because we are all on the same page. And so it was very hard for like me to watch that. And it wasn't just the one instance, like throughout the movie, like they totally like dragged her down. And that's not what we should do to each other. We got to be part of the sisterhood, and that's not what that was. And lastly, I just talked about how we had our discussion on pedophilia and the queer community and my thoughts on it. And I do think it's a very, very loaded topic. And it's something that I still need to meditate on and think about, because I have my feelings on it, but I don't have like the whole reason why. Like in class we talked about going like around in the circle, and not really getting to like the core reason of why we believe it's wrong. And so that's something that I'm going to definitely have to think more about.